Hi, my name is Kate Edwards, and I'm the Executive Director of the Global Game Jam and also a consultant at Geography that does game culturalization. And I'm really proud to be here to introduce the panel called Player Behavior, Your Secret Growth Tool for the VentureBeat Summit 2020, taking place online. And I would love to introduce our panelists. We have a great group of people who are here to discuss this topic, and we're going to focus on player behavior in the positive light, and essentially how can player behavior that we monitor, influence, and interact with in our game communities and in our services, how does that actually lead to potential growth for companies? And so to help us with that topic today, I'd like to introduce the panelists, or rather have the panelists introduce themselves, starting out with Kim.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kimberly Ball. I'm a designer and developer specializing in player behavior and artificial intelligence. Today, I currently run a small studio in Seattle, Washington, working on a cooperative shooter. And I'm also the co-founder as well as executive director of the Fair Play Alliance, which is an organization that supports gaming companies around the world in fostering healthy player interactions. I think part of the reason I got into this space initially is that I've really spent my life at the intersection of tech and behavior, specifically in games. So I've always been really fascinated by the role that the brain plays in our interactions in digital spaces. And personally, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I watched the tech world come online as a gamer and as a female in that space. That came with its own challenges and revelations about ways in which we as a society needed to mature. And I think believing in games and the amazing folks that gamers are, I've just always felt a deep and personal passion about helping make gaming a better place.
Fantastic. How about you, Clara?
Hi, it's Clara. I'm Clara Siegel. I'm a product manager with Facebook Gaming, and I work on gaming video and community products. Just for folks to be aware, our gaming video creator program started in 2018. It's now the number three most watched live game streaming service. And we really try to, focus on helping communities engage around streamers and games that they love. So very, very aligned with this topic. I just wanted to share kind of a personal story in why I care about this topic. As I was growing up, there were definitely some times where I felt like it didn't fit in. And as during those times, there were always groups of people who loved to play video games, who I felt like I could be friends with. They were very much, it was very much a culture of people celebrating each other for their idiosyncrasies and differences. And I found that not only to be just really joyous in terms of diversity, as well as creativity, but also just an area and space where I could be myself. So when I think about games, not only do I think about the game itself and what's fun about that, but also this sort of deep connection to a culture and a community of people who, can be different and different from each other. And that's a great thing. So just thrilled to be on this panel. Kate, you've done a ton of work in the space, Kim and Carlos as well, through the Fair Play Alliance. So looking forward to a good discussion.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Carlos?
Thank you. My name is Carlos Figueiredo. I'm Director of Community Trust and Safety for Two Hat. I'm also a co-founder and vice chair of the Fair Play Alliance. And really what got me working in this area and interested in this was working for Club Penguin for 6 years, many years ago, when I started my journey in 2008. And being a moderator there, also doing chat filtering and generally understanding the community and being there with the kids, I really saw how a game can grow around a very strong community and how those things go really well together. It's a strong community that's safeguarded, that's productive, that's healthy, and that generally, in my experience, means a brand that's global, it's reaching everywhere. And I think that makes a lot of sense to have those two things together. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all. So let's first talk and focus on the player behavior component. I mean, again, we don't really need to dwell too much on the negative side of player behavior. We have seen that discussed ad infinitum in all kinds of other articles and sources and panels and everything else. I don't think we really need to retread that topic because a lot of people are very much aware of the fact that there is toxic behavior in communities out there and amongst player behavior. And at the same time, we know in general that the great majority of people who are involved in our communities are on the positive side, and they are there to have a great experience and enjoy themselves. So when it comes to thinking about how we minimize the negative player behavior that might show up in our communities and maximize the positive interactions, What kind of fundamental choices do you think need to be made from a design perspective in the games themselves, as well as the gaming services or the products that we employ with the consumers? What kind of choices do you think are fundamental to be made in the design aspect?
I'm happy to take a first stab at this one. I think the biggest thing is to step back and really look critically at what the root causes of the behavior that you're seeing in the game are in the first place. I think there's a lot of tendency to kind of take behavior that we see in games as a given, rather than stepping back and looking at it from a design perspective of what are the choices that we're making as designers or developers that lead to certain behavior patterns. And I'll just give you 3 really quick examples. I think one is friction can come from a lot of places, which sets games off on the wrong foot when players are frustrated and they might take it out on each other. So this could include design choices or misaligned expectations about the kind of experience that players are anticipating. A second is the values that you want to see in the game through the design choices that you're making. Are you reinforcing those values? Are you potentially creating confusion in that how your characters behave within their fiction is contradicting the sorts of habits and behaviors you want to see within the game? Are you fostering trust between players, or are you prematurely asking players to have connections that, as normal humans, we wouldn't have with strangers? And then I think the third bucket is, it bears mentioning that intentional disruptive behavior is pretty rare, but nonetheless, we need to be able to handle those as effectively as possible. And we need to treat that with the same degree of rigor in the approach that we would with any design aspect of our product, so that we're really thinking about an end-to-end experience.
Mm. Anybody else?
I can share a bit about what we've done on Facebook Gaming. So we talked with a whole bunch of customers, and one of the biggest insights that we got is a lot of people are coming to the platform because they want really positive, kind of positive conversations and welcoming and engaging communities. And when we looked into what could we do to help promote that, people wanted less of Facebook Gaming kind of popping up and saying, hey, you should be more positive. And really what they wanted was to just feel comfortable that it was a kind of safe and welcoming environment. So the key elements of that we found just through these conversations was, 1, people want to know what are the rules and norms of the community, and 2, are they being enforced? And it turned out that sort of with those 2 in mind, not only were people able to have better expectations set for what kind of content is and is not allowed in those communities, which is going to be good for people that might break the norms, as well as for people wanting to know if they're going to feel safe there. But 2, it kind of set expectations for, hey, is this the right community for me? And I think that's going to be true at a platform level. So any gaming company or gaming product company is going to want to have a set of standards that are enforced sort of centrally, dealing with some of the sort of most toxic types of behavior. And then for any communities within the platform, they should have an opportunity also to say hey, this is what this community is all about. So what the company can really do there is offer tools to help those communities be able to kind of set and enforce and communicate their norms.
Hmm. How about you, Carlos? Any thoughts on this? I know that you've had in your work things like auto monitoring of chat rooms and things like that to basically employ methods that can kind of walk alongside what exists in the community and help moderators and help the companies also check the behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really starts with what Clara was saying there, like a really good definition of what are the types of behaviors that are really well aligned with the platform or the very purpose of the game that you want to see players doing and engaging, right? And then what are the types of behavior that are pretty much orthogonal to that experience, right? They're going to take away from that intended experience in the game or in the platform. I talk to a lot of gaming companies consulting, and I'm surprised a lot of times when folks haven't yet put the thought into that. And surprised, but also understand that it's difficult. It's really difficult to have that solid, that shared terminology and understanding. Once you have that, then you have definitions of that type of behavior. You're able to identify it, right? And to action on it. And one thing that we have been seeing as a big change in the games industry in the last few years is moving away from just punishment. And I think this is a really important part because, before we were just thinking, bad people are behaving badly, and we forget that we have bad days, especially right now in the climate that we have bad days, right? And we might behave not in the best possible way, in a game session. That doesn't mean that we always behave like that, right? And so I really think about a couple of things. One is nudging technique. related to what Kim and Clara said, like you have those expectations, you have the environment of the game. If somebody happens to behave in a way that contradicts that, give them a warning message instead of suspending them, right? Nudge them in the right direction and see what that does. But then for sure, I find it really table stakes to have a strong contextual filter that's able to prevent the worst. Very much in a proactive way, right? If somebody is really using dangerous speech, hateful speech, why expose players to that if you're able to identify that and block it?
Well, that actually segues really well into the other thing I'm curious about on this topic, and especially how we influence player behavior, because obviously, any gaming community is not just about the game. I mean, that might be the thing that draws people in, but then the community itself, for a lot of people, becomes the reason they come back, because they want to be a part of that community, and for all kinds of reasons. So kind of following on your point, Carlos, how do we actually model positive behavior and positive interactions within a community? I mean, are there tools that we can use, or some kind of other method that's out there that will help us do that kind of thing?
For sure, having flexible settings, I think that's really important, right? In the past, there was a very heavy-handed approach of allow and disallow lists and just blocking words, and then, preventing people from saying all sorts of things. And when we know things are very contextual, it depends on how it's being said, who is saying it. So when I talk about flexible settings, is we know that a lot of games have a lobby or a public area, right? And that is largely like a public square. So you have all sorts of folks interacting there for the first time. I really see that as a little bit as an invitation card. If you just join a game and the first thing you experience is somebody using dangerous speech and, being racist, like, wow, right? Like, do you want to be in this area here? So you can have settings a bit more strict there, right? In terms of what's allowed. If you have private chat or clan chat and group chat, you can be a bit more lax as a platform, because there's a bit more of knowledge there of who's part of that team, who is chatting there. So you can open it up a little bit. There are great examples of that flexibility right now, right? Like we can look at companies like Twitch, for example, with the way that they develop auto mod, and people are able to set the standards and the norms of their community. That's an example, but there are many other platforms. And what Facebook Gaming did in the project that Clara shared, streamers having that opportunity to set what is the intended experience of their channel. I think we need to look at giving people the agency and flexibility.
Yeah, I would just add that I think one of the most important things in addition to that is clarity and consistency, both for players as well as for your studio and extended support team. You really want to think about modeling the types of behaviors that you want to see in game as well. And I think all too often I've encountered inconsistent examples where there's just not really a clear understanding of what good looks like or what those expectations are even within the studio. I think extending out of that as well, equipping or empowering ambassadors to also help set that example, make those folks or help those folks become public figures and raise the visibility of folks that are really showcasing the kind of values and the way that you hope to see your game, your game played in the first place.
First of all, I want to echo a couple of the things that have been said already. I think that player behavior is such an important part of people's experience when interacting with any product or game. And we, as the people who are building these, should think about it as just as important as the other elements of what we're building into the game or the gaming platform. Also, Carlos, you mentioned something about customizability, and I just wanted to share what we're doing on our end. And thank you also for mentioning it. So what we have is at a central level, Facebook offers centralized community standards, which Facebook also enforces. And then in terms of customizability, what we've decided to do, and sort of amazingly, I want to say thank you so much for your help on this. We partnered with you and Kim as part of the Fair Play Alliance on this as well, was to basically identify what are the most common types of disruptive behaviors that people sometimes experience in gaming communities online, and to try to offer a toolkit around those. And the way we did that is we came up with an optional set of rules. So these are things like don't criticize, which would address a common issue where people who are newer players sometimes, get made fun of and feel excluded in communities, as well as be accepting, which, is intended to help people of all backgrounds and maybe game choices feel welcome in a community. And we offered those as optional to our streamers, who are really community leaders on the platform, to be able to pick and choose and to be able to communicate, hey, this is what this community is all about. And then back to what you were saying, Carlos, around education, this toolkit allows the moderator, when they remove a comment, to indicate which rule was broken. And that's back to what you were saying around, hey, maybe you're just having a bad day, or maybe you forgot kind of what this rule meant. So, we'll offer you this reminder, and hopefully it can help. This is really about communities being able to craft the kinds of spaces they want and just be really clear on what those norms are so that people can feel authentic being themselves.
That's fantastic. So have you seen, has the toolkit been implemented for a while now, or I'm just curious, have you seen results from it at this point?
So we're rolling it out now. And so we don't have the volume yet to see the results. But the initial feedback was really positive. So we saw a very large amount of adoption in the initial group of streamers that we released this to. And there's a great interview with Melanie Mack in VentureBeat where she talks about kind of being able to tell people, hey, this is what this community is all about, and kind of avoid some of the more common issues that people might have.
Excellent. So let's assume that companies, that you've all mentioned several tools and approaches at this point that they can employ. Basically, a wide range of things, from the toolkit that was just mentioned to kind of sort of the light touch, having rules and having policies in place, but not being too heavy-handed about it, things of that nature. So let's say a company implements these strategies in their community and in their game design. How do you see these actually leading to growth? Are there any examples you have of how implementation leads to more player engagement or retention or revenue? Basically, how do we make that connection?
Yeah, I can share an example. I've been thinking about this for a while now. Having worked for Two Hat for now over 5 years, we experienced in the past a lot of resistance from a lot of companies who didn't really see the point of doing those things. They saw that as censorship or really taking away from the experience. And we saw this shift of folks really understanding that a disruptive behavior actually was leading to people leaving, quitting the game, and really players do care about a healthy community, right? So we did a white paper study with one of our clients. It's an anonymous white paper, but it's a major mobile game. And what we noticed there is that for everybody who engages in chat, especially in group chat, the lifetime value and the engagement overall, the session lengths are way bigger than those who don't chat. So, and I'm gonna share the specific metrics with you, but it's important to notice that it's the chat. It's very central to that game, as it is in a lot of online platforms, right? And the difference is, we know that the stickiness of social in games, right? In my intro there, I was talking about Club Penguin. That game was all about social, right? I can talk about a game like Sky, Children of the Light, where there are specific areas of the game where people gather and talk, and it's very much about the community and that social stickiness, right? So that said, in the white paper, we noticed that for those who chat in the group chat, so not even in the public areas, actually, like in the group chat, you have your own group, the lifetime value of those players, it's actually 20 times of those who don't chat. That was the result of that study. And also in terms of engagement of session length, it's also 4 times bigger. So you see the engagement there, and of course, lifetime value and all that. But it's important to notice it's a particular community that has those flexible settings that I was talking about, right? The group chat has different filter settings than the public chat. And that flexibility allows for safeguarding the players and allows really the positive to flourish. Like you said, Kate, the majority of the behavior is positive. So it's not allowing the disruption to get in the way of that.
Yeah, I would add that players should expect and deserve to have a safe and inclusive place to play. I think as developers, we're kind of used to thinking about games as single player, and I think we bring a lot of that old school mentality into designing and developing games for multiple players. But at the end of the day, human brains are just better than most experiences with AI, or AI can augment that, but we like playing with people because of the richness of the experience that that affords. But that comes with the cost of the interplay between these players. So there's this whole other layer of things we have to think about in terms of how people will relate to each other in the context of games and what that means when compared against our mechanics and the type of experience we're trying to create. So a lot of what we're talking about is table stakes from the perspective of this is how our games reach their full potential. You can't ignore the fact that you might create this cool little sandbox, but you're going to put a bunch of humans in it and they're going to interact in different ways and things are going to different things are going to happen. And I think overall that we know just from being humans ourselves, and the psychology research bears this as well, is that feeling included means you want to stay. You want to stick around at a place where you feel welcome. So there's this sort of base level, this is a smart thing to do and it will pay a lot of dividends. And even though we're still kind of figuring out a lot of best practices in this space, and that's why we started the Fair Play Alliance, to be able to support companies around the world in doing this, ultimately we're getting better at this. We're going to keep seeing those dividends, and early results are already showing that it's quite positive, as Carlos says.
Mm.
I'll share a bit of thinking here too. So when we talk about kind of expanding the player base as a result of these, if you think of the total player base as everyone in the world who plays games, we're talking about, in the ballpark of 2.5 billion people. So I really think it's up to each game developer and each company to decide, how welcoming they want to be towards those people. And I think one factor of that is going to be, hey, if I'm making a specific game, what element of the 2.5 billion is going to be interested in this specific type of game? But then in addition to that, you have kind of this conversion factor. So we're getting a little nerdy here, but a conversion factor of people who are coming in and might feel like, oh, like the conversations here are just kind of rubbing me the wrong way. So they might bounce out. So I think just from a purely kind of numbers and theoretical perspective, it definitely makes sense for folks to realize the sort of growth potential that comes from this. Certainly Facebook, for better or for worse, is known as like a very, very inclusive platform. Like your grandparents are on it, probably. And, we have 700 million people who play games or engage in gaming groups each month, and 40% of them are women. So the market is definitely there. And I think it's just really up to each company to decide how to welcome them.
Well, that's a great point, Claire. And I mean, that actually leads to one of the other things I'm curious about in terms of growing the player base and growing interest in the game platform. How does that actually intersect with the desire for a lot of companies to increase their player base beyond the typical demographics who are playing games and to expand into more underrepresented groups? I mean, obviously, a lot of companies today are focused on, diversity and inclusion in their communities and trying to see, not just from the game design perspective, how can they attract more people who may not be typical players of their particular game, but also attract more people into the community who may not feel that they are, necessarily part of that particular group. And especially when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, not just from a strict gender or ethnicity standpoint, but also just culturally as well and geographically. I mean, I know for myself, having traveled to a lot of emerging markets where oftentimes I hear people reflect that they'll go into a lot of gaming platforms or systems that are coming out of the West primarily, and they feel that it is somewhat exclusionary just because they're not necessarily built completely for their experience as well. And so I'm wondering, do you all see that how implementing these tools and approaches, it's not just going to increase the essentially the baseline positivity within the community, but also potentially attract people who are underrepresented as well? How do you see that working as well?
I think that one of the things we really need to do is take a greater critical eye to the ways in which our games and gaming environments might be antithetical to that to begin with. What are the ways in which we have behaviors or the designs themselves that are actually not upholding that value, that actually might be exclusive in some capacity, and honing those skills to better detect that. It's really hard at the end of the day when we're talking about global products with people from a diverse background, all over the world. It's difficult for people to get along in the best of circumstances because, we're all complex, interesting individuals. And when you add layers of culture and other differences and combine that with an impoverished communication space that you see in games typically, you sort of get this recipe for a lot of friction. And that is often what we see breaking down. So we're looking for those kinds of things and trying to be proactive and foster spaces and build tools that really grow with players, grow with trust, I think is one of the best places that we can really focus our efforts. Because at the end of the day, acceptance builds trust. Trust leads to more charitable and effective interactions. And in general, just behavior and interpretations of people's behavior improves with trust.
I want to add as well to that, if that's okay, Kate.
Yeah.
Just like this angle of, when we're talking about safeguarding players, right, from abusive behavior, from dangerous speech, it's also important to do that in all the languages that you are supporting, right, and do it properly with automated tools and also staff who understands that culture. I know your work, Kate, is very much culturally aware and understanding all those aspects. Sometimes the systems we put in games for content moderation, they are not super culturally aware. So it's important to have that, that nuance as well. And if when we think about, in terms of the moral obligation, the right thing to do, safeguarding players, I think we all here don't need to convince ourselves, right? We know it's the right thing to do. From the point of view of growth, we discussed that, but also we can't deny the landscape of upcoming legislation, for example, that's coming in the UK with online harms, in Australia, some new legislation being discussed in the US and Canada. So if we are not safeguarding users in all their respective languages, we're also going to find some friction with governments, right? So better that we are also proactive as an industry and getting ahead of that curve.
Absolutely. So essentially what I'm hearing then is that, honestly, given all the examples you've provided about the different tools and approaches, which seem to be more widespread than I think a lot of people would imagine in terms of their implementation, it sounds to me like there's a lot of companies that are taking these approaches because they already realize that, effectively adapting their products and adapting their games to reinforce a more positive community and to reinforce positive player behavior really is a growth mechanism. And so even though this panel has been titled Your Secret Growth Tool, I think it's not so secret, to be honest. And so it sounds to me like this is an area of best practices that a lot of companies are starting to consider, or they're already well into implementation, but obviously it would be a great area for a lot of other companies to also consider. And with that, I think we're just about done with our time. So I would like to thank our panelists for their time and for their expertise. And if they have any parting quick thoughts, please do.
I think just keep in mind there's no solution. The aim is to reduce the overall number of poor interactions and increase the number of positive interactions that you're seeing in a space. But at the end of the day, these are spaces packed full of humans that come with all of the rich and interesting complexities that we see in non-digital spaces. So we need to bring that mindset and try to enrich these spaces as they're intended, which is for humans.
Just a quick parting thought is that, like we discussed before, normative behavior in games is really positive behavior. A lot of times we lose track of that in games and gaming platforms. So it's important for us to remember that the disruption is very small part. Usually you have positive interactions in games. So the idea is to design to maximize those positive interactions and also to deal with the disruption when it happens, because it gets in the way of the purpose of the platform and not because we just want to go out there and punish people and that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think it's so exciting to see so many companies in the space realizing that this is really important and really what a lot of people want. And I would just encourage that for companies who are just starting out, there's probably, as you start unturning stones, there's going to be some really easy wins and ways that you'll realize you can kind of improve the community for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you so much all once again. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.